Shri Gaudiya Vaishnav Guru Parampara ki jai, Śrī Jīva Goswami ki jai, Shri Sat Sandarbhas ki jai. Glorious devotees, thank you for attending another presentation on Śrī Jīva Goswami's Krishna Sandarbha. We're going into a new section of the Sandarbha presentation. We're still in the 29th Anucheta. And in this 29th Anucheta, we've seen that Jiva Goswami has shown us the proper way to interpret various statements. First of all, from the Srimad Bhagavatam itself, he took in that first subsection of this 29th Anucheta, he looked at individual verses wherein one could apply a literal translation to the verse and arrive at a conclusion which was in opposition to the Paribhasa Sutra, which is the key to understanding the Bhagavatam. So those other conclusions would lead one to believe, just from reading the verses and applying a literal translation, that Krishna is just another avataric descent and he doesn't hold any specific position of hierarchy. As we know, the Paribhasa Sutra clearly puts Krishna as Swayam Bhagavan, the topmost manifestation of divinity, according to the Gaudiya understanding of the Bhagavata Purāṇa. So Jiva Goswami is our Tattva Guru, and he brings out the essence of this statement by Sutta Goswami, Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. Krishna is the topmost manifestation. But there are other statements in the Bhagavatam that would appear to contradict this. So Jiva Goswami's looked at those statements and told us one by one how they need to be interpreted and how they're properly interpreted. And if we apply the proper interpretation of them, we can not arrive at any conclusion other than a complete agreement with the Paribhasa Sutra, that Krishna is the topmost manifestation of the Supreme Lord. Then we went on in the last subsection to look at the Mahākāla incident. Now he looked at a narrative, a narration in the Bhagavatam itself, where there's certain statements made by Mahākāla or Mahavishnu, wherein one could interpret those statements in such a way that they would be understood as putting Krishna and Arjuna in a position of subordination to Lord Krishna. And Jiva Goswami, through his Sandarbha and through various arguments that he himself put forth in the Anucheta, refuted any misinterpretations and showed us how, as Gaudiyas, utilizing proper hermeneutics and understanding of Sanskrit and understanding of the application of the Paribhasa Sutra, how that Leela narrative from the Bhagavatam should be seen. Now he continues in this 29th Anucheta, and just to give you some perspective, this is just the beginning of his fortification of the Paribhasa Sutra. From here, he's going to wage an all-out war on four fronts in the Anuchetas that we will enter into after this in defense of the Paribhasa Sutra. So this is so central to our understanding as Gaudiya Vaishnavas to accept Krishna as the topmost manifestation of divinity. Because once we can assimilate that understanding and fully defend that understanding, or at least understand the defenses of that understanding, if we've not yet acquired the qualification, which unfortunately for the majority of us, where we are in our spiritual advancement, we may not be able to fully present all of the arguments to defend the conclusions of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, even though we accept them. So that's a distinction that's made. It's actually a defining characteristic of the interim stage of devotional practice, the Madhyamadikari. He himself is fully convinced of all the scriptural conclusions as put forth in the Siddhanta of the Sampradaya in which he is developing his spirituality personally. So he's convinced of the conclusions, but he may not be able to fully defend those conclusions scripturally and logically. And that's one of the defining characteristics of that stage of devotional practice. As he advances to the stage of Uttama Adhikari, then complete absorption in Shastra and complete absorption in the conclusions and the logic and the defense of those conclusions is made readily available to him. And therefore we refer to him as Shastravit, the Uttama Adhikari, the Paramahansa. And not all Paramahansas will display themselves in human society and enter into the outreach. There is a nomenclature applied to various advanced devotees, and one of them is the devotee that is more or less content in his own spiritual pursuit, and he doesn't really engage in outreach, the Bhajananandi. And the other, he does engage in outreach. He does try to make accessible to human society the glorious position of devotion and the amazing qualities and associates of the Supreme Lord and his Leelas in such a way that those that are immersed in materiality can turn their consciousness towards the Lord. The terminology is there for him, Goshtyanadi. He's going out. So his bhajan is an outreaching. And of course, he is relishing the outreach as much as the Bhajananandi is relishing the inreach. So he's going both in and out in his outreach. So now Jiva Goswami is proceeding in this section of the 29th Anucheda to give another lesson to us in the proper interpretation of a Shastric Leela and Shastric statements in relation to the Kesa-Avataras of Viṣṇu that appears in various Purāṇas and the Mahābhārata. So he's going beyond the Srimad Bhagavatam and taking us into other avenues where, if we were to read these other scriptures, one, taking a literal translation of the incidents, could arrive at a different conclusion. So how are this specific Leela, the Kesa-Avataras of Viṣṇu, how should it be looked upon so that it is in complete conformity with the Paribhasa Sutra of the Bhagavata Purāṇa, which is the key by which we understand divinity, the key by which we understand the Supreme Lord, and we develop an attachment to the Supreme Lord in a specific manifestation, which our Sampradaya is putting forth as the topmost manifestation of divinity. And they're doing that in a very dignified, in a very conclusive way. As Gaudiya Vaishnavas, we're completely convinced of this at heart. And gradually, as we continue in our practice, we will become more and more convinced until those convictions afford us the opportunity of revelation. So let's read something of this other arguments presented by Jiva Goswami in support of the Paribhasa Sutra. He continues, "It will now be demonstrated that even statements from other scriptures that appear to contradict the above conclusion, that Krishna is Swayam Bhagavan, are actually in accordance with it. In this regard, we find the following statement in Viṣṇu Purāṇa. O great sage, he uprooted 2 of his hairs, one white, Sita, and one black, Krishna." He continues, and in the Mahābhārata, "And he, Bhagavan Hari, uprooted 2 hairs from his head. One was white, the other black. These 2 hairs then entered into the 2 women of the Yadu dynasty, Rohini and Devaki. Out of these 2 hairs of that Deva, Hari, the white one became Balarāma, and the other hair, which was black in color, became Keshava." So that's a statement from the Mahābhārata. In his commentary to Srimad Bhagavatam, Sridhar Swami has explained the purport of these statements as given below. While interpreting the compound Sita Krishna Kesha, white and black hair, he writes. So now Jiva Goswami takes us to the commentary on the Bhagavata Purāṇa in regards to the second canto, 7th chapter, verse 26. And again, Sridhar Swami is that illustrious Vaishnav whose commentary on the Bhagavatam was so much appreciated by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So he comments there, the white and black hairs indicate his beauty and not the effects of aging, because his body is free from all modifications brought about through the influence of time. The statement, he uprooted 2 hairs from his head, and then he quotes that verse from the Viṣṇu Purāṇa, is not to suggest that the hair itself would become an avatar, but to let it be known to the devas who prayed to him just how insignificant is the task of relieving the earth of its burden, as if to say, even 2 hairs of mine can accomplish that. The uprooting of the 2 hairs, white and black, is to be understood as indicating Balarāma and Krishna's respective bodily hues. So they're an indicator, but it's not a literal interpretation that the Godhead uprooted 2 of his hairs and from his hairs entered into the wombs, and in entering into the wombs, there were 2 avataric descents. Sridhar Swami, in his commentary, says this is not the way to understand it. The proper understanding lies in the fact that the relieving of the earth from the negative influence of demoniac leaders is such a paltry thing, such a simple thing to be dealt with, that I could do it with 2 hairs from my head. Now, that doesn't play down the manifestation of the Leela of Krishna and Balarāma, but rather it's just to put things in proper perspective and give us a proper understanding of the incident. Jiva Goswami continues, otherwise, if the literal reading were to be accepted, it would contradict prior and posterior statements within this very context. Additionally, any interpretation to the contrary would oppose the declaration, Krishna, however, is Swayam Bhagavan. Here ends Sridhar Swami's comments. So, Jiva has now quoted Sridhar Swami as he said he would do when he explained how this particular presentation of the Sandarbhas would be put forth, that he would be quoting from illustrious authorities on Vaishnavism. Sridhar would be the topmost, Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, everything that was related in various writings by Madhva, which included his extensive library, which unfortunately had been lost in time. So he's going to draw from all of this, and he's going to, as instructed by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, fully ground Gaudiya Siddhanta in Shastra. Now, Jiva himself continues to write, here the following purport is also possible. So he's quoted Sridhar Swami's perspective. Now he's going to give his perspective. O Devas, why do you insist that I alone should avatarically descend? I am a specific manifestation of the Purusha called Aniruddha, who resides in Sweta-dweep in the ocean of milk. Indeed, these 2, Sri Vasudeva and Sankarshan, who are to be upheld on my own head like hair, indicating that they are worthy of my highest regard, will descend themselves to the earth. Moreover, for them, ridding the earth of its burden will be a trifling task. So now, a different understanding. The demigods seeking relief from the burden of demoniac rulership in human society went to the Purusha, in this instance, lying in the ocean of milk within that specific universe, and they made an appeal. We need your help. Despite all that we have tried to do, it's not enough. So if you could kindly advent yourself and help us relieve the burden of the earth created by this demoniac rulership, we would greatly appreciate it. We appeal to you. We pray to you. So they've come and they've made their appeal, and Jiva Goswami is paraphrasing here a response that, first of all, the Purusha in the specific universe is a manifestation of Aniruddha, part of the Chatravyuha. The Chatravyuha enters in as the Purusha avatars, Karna Dakshai Viṣṇu, Garbha Dakshai Viṣṇu, Kashira Dakshai Viṣṇu. So Aniruddha being Kashira Dakshai Viṣṇu within the specific universe, residing there, is saying, I don't need to come because the Lord himself is coming. Vasudeva and Sankarshan, certainly, I hold them on my head. They're going to make an avataric descent. When they advent, this will be a simple, trifling task, this relieving the burden of the earth. And they, Vasudeva and Sankarshan, are like hairs on my head. They are above me. I am praying to them. He continues, the word meaning of Ujaharatmana, keśa, is also given in the commentary of Mukta Phala as follows. And now he's fortifying, again and again, he's fortifying the proper understanding. Keśa means the two masters of bliss. The white-colored one is Rama. The Lord uplifted Ujahara them from himself, Atmanaha. Indeed, in the Harivamsa Purāṇa, it is stated that Bhagavan concealed his own form in a mountain cave, and having stationed Garuda there as its custodian, he himself appeared here. This is described in the following words. Let us read on, and then we'll discuss a little. Now we're quoting from the Harivamsa Purāṇa. Jiva quotes there, Vaisapayana said, in this way, taking leave of the devas in their solitary heavenly domain, Swarga, Lord Viṣṇu went to his own abode in the northern quarter of the Milk Ocean. At that location there is a cave called Parvati in Meru Mountain, which is difficult to approach and is worshipped regularly by the devas on the occasion of the new and full moons. The benevolent, omnipresent Lord Hari placed his primeval body there and manifested himself in the house of Vasudeva. So, our understanding is whenever Bhagavan Śrī Krishna, Swayam Bhagavan Śrī Krishna, manifests within a material universe, all of his expansions enter into him. So this is giving us some insight. Here we have, within the universe, a manifestation of the Purusha, Karnodakshai Viṣṇu, Aniruddha, from the Chatravyuha of the three that are Purushas, three of the four become the Purusha avatars, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. Actually, Vasudeva, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. What's being said is, I hide my manifestation of Viṣṇu away in a cave in the Meru mountain called Parvati, and then I enter into Vasudeva when he makes his avataric descent. Jiva continues, those who have commented on this verse solely in conformity with the literal meaning of the words have not deliberated properly, because it is well known that even the suras are free from old age and its effects such as gray hair. So what to speak of Viṣṇu himself, who is Deva Deva, Bhagavan, who is beyond the ravages of time. is altogether free from gray hair because he is not subject to aging. Nor is there any evidence that he naturally has black and gray hair. Consequently, in the Nṛsiṁha Purāṇa, in the context of Krishna's avataric descent, it is precisely the word Shakti, potency, that has been used and not the word keśa, hair. For example, appearing in the Yadu dynasty in Devaki through Vasudeva, his white and black potencies, Shaktis, will slay Kamsa and others. So now Jiva's pointing out that even this word keśa, which could be literally interpreted as hair, is not used in the Nṛsiṁha Purāṇa just so that it's not misunderstood. In the Nṛsiṁha Purāṇa, in relating the same Leela narrative, the word Shakti is used instead of keśa. To be so well schooled in all the different Purānas that you could find these details and bring them out in such a way to enlighten the Gaudiya community is one of the characteristics of someone of the caliber of a Jiva Goswami. He continues, it may be argued, so then let the word keśa be indicative of a part, amsa. Jiva is saying, wait a minute. To this we must reply, no, because he, Sri Krishna, is ascertained as the original Purusha himself, being unremittingly self-endowed with all potencies, and because the names Krishna, Viṣṇu, and so on are used without any distinction, being understood as synonyms. There is no other avatar whose appearance day is widely renowned by the name Jayanti, the birthday of Sri Krishna. Thus it is said in the Mahābhārata. In this book, it is Bhagavān Vasudeva, the eternal, imperishable, supreme Brahmān, who is glorified. He is the object of the yogi's meditation and is untouched by matter. Here ends the excerpt from Hamadri's commentary on Muktaphala, known as Kaivalya Dipika. So we can see that Jiva is opposed to, and he's already given us this opposition earlier in relationship to the Paribhasa Sutra, wherein he quoted Madhvacharya's understanding of the Bhagavatam verse that contains Krishna stu Bhagavan Swayam as indicating that that particular pada meant that from Madhva's viewpoint, there wasn't a fraction of difference between the different avatars. Jiva Goswami already made that point evident to us, and then he completely refuted Madhva's conclusion. So the Tattvavadis, following Madhvacharya, they do not see a distinction between the different manifestations. They do not recognize a hierarchy of the different manifestations of divinity. For them, the Purusha, Krishna, Narayan, and Vaikuntha all are equal manifestations of the Supreme Lord, whereas as Gaudiyas, we have a different understanding, and we do see that there is a hierarchy because there's so much scriptural evidence pointing out this hierarchy, explaining the Chaturvyuha, the various divisions there, Vasudeva, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, Aniruddha, and when coming into the Purusha manifestations of that Chaturvyuha, the different distinctions, one being Karnadakshay Viṣṇu, from which all the universes come forth, Garbhadakshay Viṣṇu, entering into each universe. And from him, Brahmā is coming. And Brahmā is sometimes conceived of as the totality of all jivas together, samasti jiva. And then from him, we have Kshirodakshay Viṣṇu, entering into, as Brahma populates the universe through his various expansions, all of the various Jivatmas, and entering each of their hearts. So here, Jiva Goswami is again saying, no, they're not all the same. And there is a hierarchy, and those that do not see it, they do not have the proper understanding. We will continue with Jiva Goswami. His being free from the influence of time is confirmed by the words of Sri Devaki Devi. So again, someone could misunderstand even the characteristics of divinity and look to a statement in the scripture that talks about a white and a black hair and say, well, God is just another personality. There's as much influence by the ravages of time within the universe as we ourselves are. And Jiva's quoting Shastra and bringing out the fact that that is not the case. O friend of the unmanifest, Prakriti, this phenomenon of time by which the cosmos is impelled is referred to as your own volitional act, keśa. The same conclusion is also widely recognized from this statement of the residents of Dwarka. O Lord, we perpetually bow down to your lotus feet, which are worshipped by Brahmā, his sons, Sanaka and so on, and the kings of the devas, Indra, which are the supreme shelter of those in this world who aspire for the ultimate welfare, and over which time, Kala, the supreme ruler, even of Brahmā and so on, has no influence at all. So now a statement from the Bhagavatam, wherein the residents of Dwarka are speaking to the glorious position of the Supreme Lord, even over that of the demigods. Now, from their perspective, the demigods are immortal. They can't comprehend a lifetime with such a duration of that of the demigods. But they have enough spiritual insight to appreciate the fact that even the demigods are bowing down to the Lord's lotus feet. And therefore, he must be in a superior position to them. So if they're not ravaged by time, how could he be ravaged by time and have gray hair? It makes no sense. Jiva Goswami continues. In the Prabhash Khanda, it has been shown that the word keśa denotes hair, and its characteristic of turning gray due to aging. Such a direct meaning is without authority, because the topic belongs to a section that advocates dry renunciation for embodied beings, and because it is common knowledge that all devas are free from old age. In this respect, it resembles the following description from Garuda Purāṇa. Quoting Garuda Purāṇa, Jiva says, I offer obeisance to the cosmic law of karma, which, like a potter, restrained Brahmā within the pot in the form of the universe, which cast Lord Viṣṇu into great tribulation by impelling him to accept 10 avatars, which made Rudra go begging with a skull in his hand, and by the power of which the sun rotates perpetually in the sky. Such statements, they do not hold authority because they do not have the significance of fully revealing to the reader the proper spiritual conclusion. So, in the context of their presentation, Jiva's pointing out, to take the direct meaning, it doesn't have any authority. We have to see Shastric statements according to context. And he says, because the topic belongs to a section that advocates dry renunciation for the embodied beings. So the context is, this is a section of Shastra that's pointing out the unfortunate material condition that everyone is affected by old age. But it doesn't correspond with the comprehensive understanding that even the devas in the heavenly realm are not affected by old age from the wider understanding of Shastra. And it's interesting that they don't go through the ravages of old age like one does on the earthly planet. So the demigod's position is certainly superior. And when we look at statements, Jiva say, this resembles this other statement from the Garuda Purāṇa. And if we read it, it looks like this. If we just take a literal meaning of this statement, Lord Viṣṇu is even cast into great tribulation and forced to take avataric descents. That Rudra, Shiva, is forced to take a skull and go begging by the power of the rotation of the sun. All of these great personalities are being influenced by material circumstance. These statements do not stand up in the light of the deep and fully comprehensive understanding of Shastra. And it's so important that we, even in looking at these statements used by Jiva Goswami as exemplars of how to properly approach Scripture, our mind goes back to the fact that even the presentation of Scripture by Srila Vyasadeva from the devotional viewpoint was not comprehensive enough. He wasn't content, and Narada Muni wasn't content with his presentation. He hadn't gone to the heart of the matter. He'd given all of the different artha, dharma, kama, moksha, all the different formulations of how to get the best out of life and how to properly attain release from karma altogether. So in the Vedas, he'd given everything, artha, dharma, kama, moksha, but he hadn't given this deepest understanding of that fifth attainment, which is unalloyed devotion for the Supreme Lord. So therefore, we have the Bhagavata Purāṇa, a rewriting after an in-depth entering into the samadhi under the direction of Narada. He realized this I need. He had revelation. He saw the Supreme Lord in his most magnificent manifestation, and he saw the living entities, and he saw how they could be enlightened to the platform of unalloyed devotion, which far exceeds the simple attainment of moksha or liberation, the fourth material attainment or spiritual attainment, freedom from karma. But it's just that. It's freedom from karma. It's not unalloyed devotion, which carries with it spiritual fulfillment and service, which far exceeds simply turning off the pains and oppressive nature of the Lord's external energy. So a little commentary here on this section. Here Jiva Goswami takes up the task of reconciling similar conflicting statements found in other Purāṇas. Among such descriptions, the most prominent are those that depict Kṛṣṇa and Balarāma as avatars of the black and white hairs of Viṣnu. This notion is found not only in the Mahābhārata, but also in Viṣṇu Purāṇa, and even in the Bhagavata Purāṇa itself. If, however, one carefully examines the complete narration presented in these Purāṇas, one will recognize that such a conclusion is simply without cogency. The story behind the keśa hair, avatar, is that when the earth goddess felt overburdened by the proliferation of unrighteous kings, she approached the host of devas, headed by Brahmā. Hearing her plea, Brahmā advised the devas to accompany him to the milk ocean to supplicate Bhagavān Viṣṇu. Being pleased with their prayers, Śrī Viṣṇu appeared to Brahma in response to the report of the earth's plight. He plucked out 2 hairs from his head and announced that these hairs would descend to the earth and rid her of this burden. So this is how the narrative is presented in these various shastras, some of these various shastras. As an explanation of these verses, Śrī Jīva first refers to Sridhar Swami's comment on the Srimad Bhagavatam verse, where the latter makes the following points. The white and black hairs of Bhagavān Viṣṇu cannot be the effect of aging, since he is altogether free from modification. Rather, they are to be taken as a sign of his beauty. So they'll be taken not with a literary interpretation. 2, the uprooting of Vishnu's 2 hairs does not mean that the hair itself appeared as avatars. In this connection, the word ujjahara, uprooted, is used in the sense of lifted up. This indicates that removing the earth's burden is a trivial task that could be accomplished even by 2 hairs from Vishnu's head. 3, the uplifting of the black and white hair was with the intent of indicating Krishna and Balarāma's respective bodily hues. 4, if the literal reading were accepted, it would contradict both prior and posterior statements within this very context. In particular, it would violate the declaration. Krishna, however, is Swayam Bhagavan. Śrī Jīva Goswami adds to this that what Viṣṇu meant was as follows: O devas, why do you insist that I alone should avatarically descend to relieve the earth of her burden? Be pleased to know that Krishna and Balarāma, who are worthy of my reverence and whom I uphold on my head, like these 2 hairs, will themselves appear there. This is the intended meaning. To take the direct meaning of keśa as hair would contradict many other statements besides the formal declaration. Krishna, however, is Swayam Bhagavan. For example, in Amara Kosa, the devas are referred to as nirjara, ageless, and tridas, ever situated in the 3rd period of life, i.e., youth, the first 2 being childhood and adolescence. So from this explanation, we can see that the proper understanding is that the devas never leave the splendor of their youthful manifestation. This indicates that they are not subject to aging, but remain ever youthful. Consequently, they do not have gray hair. If this is the case for the devas, how could Viṣṇu, who is the Lord of the devas, be susceptible to such physical degradation? So what must be that place, the heavenly domain, where everyone is forever youthful? There's no adults. Commentary continues. Sometimes scriptures employ cryptic statements to conceal the truth from those whose faith structure and attention is drawn elsewhere. Being ineligible to receive the truth as it is, they remain bewildered by such statements. In Mahābhārata, Vyasa, the author, proclaims that only he, his son Sukha, and possibly Sanjaya know its true import. This implies that the underlying truth that the book entails remains hidden from the view of the masses. Vyasa is the author of all the other Purāṇas and must have inserted similar cryptic verses therein as well to conceal a deeper meaning. Those depicting Krishna as an avatar of Viṣnu's keśa or as his amsa are precisely of this nature. Such verses are called kuta, cryptic, or enigmatic statements. In light of this conclusion, we are advised to find an alternative meaning of the word keśa. The appropriate use of logic is to provide coherent meaning to the statements of Shastra. From all this discussion, it is evident that the word keśa does not necessarily mean hair in this particular context, nor does the word amsa always mean a part when used in regard to Krishna's appearance on earth. Śrī Jīva Goswami raises another oppositional view, Purvapaksa. He says that even if we accept all the above interpretations of the verses from different Purāṇas, we cannot avoid taking the literal meaning of keśa as hair in the description found in Prabhas Khanda of Skanda Purāṇa. There it is apparently mentioned that Krishna's hair turned white with age. He explains that this type of representation is simply to instill the spirit of renunciation in the mind of the reader, because the theme of the topic under discussion is vairagya, or dispassion from embodied existence. Jiva even points out that if we look to the Skanda Purāṇa and this literal meaning of keśa, which is presented there, in other words, there's no other way to read what's being presented there, that Krishna's hair turned white with age. He points out, but that Purāṇa, that section of that Purāṇa is not there to give us anything outside of the context of the subject being discussed. And the subject being discussed is not in relationship to the position of the Supreme Lord in relationship with the devas and the jivas. It's to bring forth the understanding of renunciation, which is required on the part of the reader in order for them to gain some footing in spirituality. Some level of renunciation is required. And different examples of the reason that one must renounce are put forth. And this explanation that not only you, but the devas above you, and even Krishna himself, he can also be affected by time. But that's not, the context has to be, it's to get the point across regarding renunciation. So this commentary continues. There's two more slides, so I'm just going to read the two of them, just so we complete this section. According to Padma Purāṇa and Matsya Purāṇa, the Purāṇas related to Lord Shiva are tamasic in nature, and thus not always authoritative in regard to the self-disclosure of non-dual truth. If particular statements from these Purāṇas violate the conclusions of the Bhagavata Purāṇa, which embodies the perspective born of non-duality, they must not be taken in their primary sense. Of course, this commentary is for us as Vaishnavas. So we must not take them in their primary sense as they're presented in those Purāṇas. We have to take them looking through the lens of the Bhagavata Purāṇa. And even looking through the lens of the Bhagavata Purāṇa, always we must depend upon the Paribhasa Sutra as the key to the deep understanding presented there. Just as in the Vedas, there are statements propounding ritual action or karma, which are superseded by statements related to the immediate intuition of the self or jnana. In the same way, the Bhagavat overrides the contradictory statements of other Purāṇas. Ugrashava Sutta was the speaker of Bhagavata Purāṇa, whereas Purāṇas other than the Bhagavat were spoken by his father, Romaharshan, whose knowledge of Bhagavan was incomplete. As a result, he disrespected Lord Balarāma and lost his life. Lord Balarāma subsequently installed his son in his place. It is in reference to such scholars who do not have proper understanding of Bhagavan that Sri Sutta Goswami said, "Such is the account some sages put forth. O wise king, but those who speak in this illogical manner contradict themselves, having forgotten their own prior statements." That's from the 10th canto. They forget that if Krishna is admitted as an avatar of a hair of Viṣṇu, that would contradict their own statements affirming Krishna as Swayam Bhagavan. It is concluded, therefore, that the word keśa in Viṣṇu Purāṇa does not mean hair, and that Krishna is not a partial manifestation of Viṣṇu. Puranic statements to this effect are made either to conceal esoteric truth or because the speaker is unacquainted with such confidential mysteries. So that concludes this subsection of the section of the Krishna Sandarbha, the 29th Anucheta. We will continue in our next discussion with the next subsection of this large Anucheta, dealing with the proper interpretation of Shastra and Leela narratives in the Bhagavatam and other scriptures regarding the Paribhasa Sutra. I sincerely thank you for your kind association. Vanchakalpatubhischa, Kripasindabevacha, Patitanam, Pamanebhyo, Vaishnavijyo Namo Namaha.
Dhīra dhīra jana priyau, priyakarau, nirmasaram pujitau.